It's different nowadays, but anyway, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I love coming down to Florida.
Yeah.
And it's good to see you finally face to face after a couple of years of the pandemic. So it's good to be here.
Yeah, it's been, I don't know how long it's been. I guess since probably the last time I saw you was up in Montreal.
Yes, exactly.
4 years ago, maybe.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
it's been a minute.
When you're still at Flight Docs. I think it was even prior to the ATP
it was.
acquisition. Yeah.
It was.
Yeah.
But good to see you. Thanks for coming down. How's the trip going so far?
It's fantastic. Uneventful, and that's what we like to hear.
That's good.
When you're flying.
Sure. But maybe you could start with just like a quick intro for those who don't know you. Maybe just a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your organization, and we'll take it from there.
Sure. Okay. So, Patrick O'Brien, I'm a manager of flight ops at Execaire. Execaire is part of the Execaire Aviation group. And that group has quite a few different pieces to it. We have aircraft management, aircraft charter sales, we have aircraft sales, we have in-service MIIR, which is maintenance, inspection, installation, and refurbishment, which is kind of like an MRO. Sure. NDT, non-destructive testing. We do a lot of airline support for GoGo Wi-Fi. And we also have a couple FBOs up in Canada. So, pretty sprawling company in terms of the services that we offer, and the Execaire Aviation Group is actually part of IMP Group, which is a conglomerate company based out of Halifax. It has about 3,500 employees, and they have a pretty big aviation arm, but they're also into real estate development, healthcare, IT development, and all that kind of stuff. So a huge conglomerate organization. So, but for me personally, I mean, I've been at Execaire for 10 years now. I got into Execaire after finishing my university. I was kind of, when I came out of university, I was kind of a guy didn't know really what he wanted to do. I mean, honestly, I did a bachelor's degree in biology, and then I did my commercial pilot's license at the same time. So I came out of there, I was like, okay, what do I want to do exactly? Mm-hmm. And, lots of credit to my parents. They pushed me back into school, which parents usually do. Yeah. And I went back and I did my MBA as well. So when I finished that, for the MBA, you have to do an internship with a company. Okay. And so I kind of just, threw out my CV to a whole bunch of companies that did private aviation, airlines, and all that kind of stuff. And I just wanted to see, if someone came back and said, I'd be interested in having you. And, funny enough is Execaire came back. They brought me in as an intern for 4 months. I did some fuel procurement for them and stuff like that, project management. And when I finished my MBA after the internship, they brought me back, and I've been there ever since. I started on the business side doing finance and project management. Okay. And then I knew my passion was in the aviation and the flight ops side. Sure. And from a young age, that's what I wanted to do. And I had my commercial pilot's license, so they sent me to Africa for 2 years to fly for their operation in Africa. And then I came back, flew the Lear 60 out of Toronto. And now I've integrated into manager of flight ops, and my job there is really logistical management for the aircraft, permit management. Essentially we're the brains of the operation, I guess you could say. Sure. We're the central brain. So we coordinate my group, the group that I supervise. We do the client service side. So we have a team of people that work with the client to build the mission. Mm-hmm. Then as part of my group too, we have what we call our trip support group, and their job is to kind of acquire services for the airplane. So the FBO, customs, all that kind of stuff at the best value. Sure. And that's really something that we spent a lot of time and effort on recently, is acquiring services at the best value for our clients. Mm-hmm. And then we have our dispatch group, and their job is to flight follow. So it's day of operations within 24-hour period. They do the flight planning, flight following, and stuff like that. I also get to fly as well, which is absolutely fantastic. When the office life gets stressful, I can just, fly off for a couple of days. So, that's something I insist on at Execaire, is the ability to actually fly. I've listened to a couple of your podcasts, and a lot of the guys and people that come on the show. They always kind of have the same beginning, right? Or they've built products because they've been in the operation, and they really understand, what are the problems, And for me, it's the same thing. Is how am I supposed to manage a flight operation when I don't know what the team does?
Sure.
So being able to fly, I touch everything. Being a pilot on the aircraft, we touch the customer service side. So we know if things on the customer service side aren't doing very well. We know if things on the trip support side aren't doing well, and we know if things on the dispatch side aren't doing well. So it really allows me to kind of, test our group out and make sure that we're delivering on our service standards. So.
Cool.
It's a long answer.
No, no worries. I think that was very informative and a perfect answer.
Excellent.
And so you currently fly a
Challenger 605.
605. Very cool. And we got linked up, I don't know how long ago, probably 6-7 years ago or so.
Almost, I think when I started Execaire, 2013 probably.
Okay.
It was so funny. I remember that day distinctly because I came down into the maintenance office and there was this brochure sitting on the table, and the person there told me, "Oh yeah, there was this guy and he just came and he dropped this brochure off and he wanted to meet with people and whatever." And obviously they didn't grant you an audience because all that was there was the brochure at the time. So I opened the brochure, and the rest is history. At that point, talking about technology, that's one of the things that I do regret, is not being able to implement flight docs in our organization as of yet. But
I think what was interesting is that even though we actually didn't do a deal over all of these years, I always looked at you guys as, and you in particular, as always being hungry for new technology. And I think that stemmed from, you, just like you just said, being in kind of, understanding the business side of things, actually flying the aircraft, running the flight operations group. You saw the impact of technology, whether it was a lack of technology and having a negative impact on how things went, or, actually pursuing new technology and seeing what that could do for the business, for your people, for your customers. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about maybe your strategy or your outlook on technology, and maybe how, in getting into flight operations, how you've maybe implemented some things and the impact that's had.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I'd add one thing to your, you said how technology kind of improves life, or how lack of technology can make life worse. And I would say that there's a third option to that, which is, technology making life worse.
Sure. Yes.
And my biggest belief, and what's driven me for the last 10 years in terms of the technological revolution that we're trying to bring into our operation, is the ability to tie yourself with people who have the same mindset, and that's the tough part, right? So you need to find people who believe in continuous innovation, and people who understand the industry and where it's going, and how technology can serve the client. Because a lot of times, and we still have that today, we still work with products that, it seems to be the opposite, which is the client serves the software, and when it comes time to actually make adjustments to those software systems, the software is so old in terms of its infrastructure and its architecture that it kind of just can't. It can't.
Right. Sure.
It just can't. Right. No matter how much motivation, money you throw at it, it's not there. It's not up to speed. And I know that you, particularly when you were at Flight Docs, you guys made the decision to rewrite, the core foundation of the entire product. And, certainly that was probably something that was quite costly, time consuming. And, but, I bet if I was to ask you whether it was the right decision, your answer would probably be yes.
Yes, for sure. Yes.
It's funny because, when we were, honestly, and Execaire has been around since 1955, if I remember correctly. And, we find boxes a lot of times with paper in it and stuff like that. And one of the things we found the other day was a CD-ROM of Flight Docs.
Okay. that was even before my time.
was probably before your time. So it's funny, but it's how technology evolves. And, the thing is that I think there are, still products out there that still have that same, CD-ROM, maybe not CD-ROM, they're cloud per se, but they still have the same kind of, back-end infrastructure and architecture, and they just can't support, what we're trying to accomplish. And, today, a lot of the issues that we're having is, one of the things that I like about Flight Docs and the things I like about, we use Avianis as well, which Avianis was bought by Wheels Up about a year ago, I guess, at this point, is that, their product is built on the APIs, right? So a lot of times what we find with legacy companies or legacy software is that the APIs are kind of built as add-ons, to kind of tie in with the core product. But because they're add-ons and they're not part of the core functionality of the application, they tend to be unmaintained, or they don't get the development that they deserve to make them better and take advantage of the new features in the product. So you end up kind of tying yourself with an API that is unmaintained, buggy, and stuff like that.
Right.
So over the last 10 years, that's really what we've been doing. We've been looking at companies. We've been looking at companies that have that culture, right? That innovation, that drive to innovate new products, new features, that understand the industry, understand the pain points, and are able to deliver. We've definitely come up to some roadblocks there, because a lot of these companies too, because it's aviation, the market is kind of small. They really kind of get into this funk where it's like, well, we have all these great ideas, we want to be innovative, but then it comes time to actually, do the development, and it takes a lot of time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, it's a tricky industry to be in that for companies to really to build something and continue to deliver on it, right? You need a certain amount of money there to continue to invest. But even within our business aviation community, in that segment of the market, there are even more segments, right? You have the small corporate flight departments. You have, obviously the larger charter organizations, the management companies. And so there's a bunch of different features that maybe don't, the core platform is there and kind of can serve everybody, but there's all of these kind of add-ons or additional feature sets that are really only particular to, certain customers in the market, right? And that presents, like, from a development standpoint, that definitely presents obstacles, and from like a go-to-market standpoint, that presents obstacles. And so I think what we've found is that certain companies have kind of built a business model, either maybe going after the large players or going after the small players, and as they're trying to scale, they're running into issues in doing that.
Yeah. I mean, our industry is unforgiving in that regard, because it's it's funny. I was listening to one of your guests the other day, and he's like, it would have been easier to build software for yoga studios, right? Because the reality is that to your point is every business is different. In aviation, and we all have our own different regulatory requirements. We have our own business requirements in terms of what our clients want. And that's the thing with management companies, is that we strive in for each one of our clients to provide them with a curated, very specific experience for them. And it's like, okay, well, how do you then translate that into a software package, right? And so what we've done over the last 10 years is we've said, okay, well, I kind of lost patience trying to change the core products, because they all have their own development time frame, they all have their own priorities, and Execaire is a fairly large management company, in North America, but even with being a fairly large company, we can talk about customer advisory boards and that kind of stuff, and we can go into detail about that. But the reality is that these companies, they set their own development priorities, and it could be 2-3 years, if maybe that your request gets developed. So what we ended up doing is we have an internal team of developers, and we've decided that we're going to build our business logic into our own products. Not to the scale of, outsourcing it, or not outsourcing it, but selling it or making it an enterprise, level platform. But it's pretty inexpensive these days to build, apps.
Sure.
In the grand scheme of things. So, what we did is we said, well, why don't we, we have the core product. The core product does what it does really well, which is maintenance tracking or, whatever at that point. And then we say, okay, well, let's extract from that product the very specific data points that we need. And then we'll build an app for our operation that feeds off of these various data points. And then we can craft it into the business logic that we want. So we're not replacing really the core functionality because, again, we buy the product because they're the best at doing that.
Sure.
And it would be very costly to replicate a maintenance tracking system. And I'm using that just as an example, but millions.
Building full products in house is really not a great option for any type of business aviation operator.
No, it really is not. But what I think has been a winning strategy for us is that, we said, okay, and that's why it's so important for us to tie ourselves with companies that are innovative and, very strong API suites is because, we can then access that data and do what we want with it.
Yeah.
That's what we did with the Execaire app. So, we built 2 years ago, we set out, we said, look, the pilots were confronted with a wall of technology. Like it was just crazy. We were talking about it at the time. We're like, okay, so if you want to be a pilot at Execaire, you're going to be confronted with, your flight planning tool, your maintenance tracking tool, your, hotel tool, your, logbook, your or SMS tool.
The number of apps that they have to deal with is crazy.
Yeah. And then, you tie that in with, generally speaking, not a cultural issue, but maybe a generational issue. We have pilots that, they were not born with iPhones in their hands like some of us are.
Right.
So, the change management piece there is tough. So, it's kind of a recipe for, non-compliance and that kind of stuff. So, we said, well, let's not give them 12 apps and then have to remember 12 usernames, and then your password has to change every 90 days, and it can't be the same password you use in the last 3 times, and it's got to contain all these different characters and all that kind of stuff, and then it's multi-factor authentication. You have to open your app every time. Anyways, so, and that's not going to get any better. The security aspect's not going to change.
Right.
So we're like, okay, well, why don't we then, hide those 11 products from the pilots, because really at the end of the day, they have their core specialities and whatever. And then let's just build, the front end piece for the pilot, So that's what we did. We have the Execaire app, and it's on version 2 now. Version 3 is going to be coming out in the summer with a whole bunch of really great functionality to it. But, so the pilot now, it's all in one place. He or she can kind of log into the app and they see, the flights they're assigned to. They can check in for their flights. They can check their maintenance status. They can check their training status. They can submit SMSs. They can log their flight times. They can report customer service issues to us right there. So, from a, daily flight ops kind of piece, the pilots just use one app.
Right.
And we found, we've had an increase in SMSs. Not necessarily just reactive SMSs, but proactive SMSs as well, risk analyses,
Sure.
Because, when we thought about it 2 years ago, we were spot on, is that if you make the technology easy to access, you'll have a better adoption of it, and there's no question.
Sure. When it comes to adoption, because I think that this is something that a lot of operators struggle with as well, and I think that you guys typically take a more strategic approach to how you go about adoption and implementation. Because you can go out and look for, the best product out there, and you run through the demo, you do your analysis, you compare it to your current products, and then you say, okay, let's pull the trigger on this. But I've seen, plenty of actual failures in actually implementing and adopting the technology because there wasn't a plan laid out to do so. So what's the typical approach? I know that you guys have implemented plenty of platforms. What's your approach to doing that?
It's tough. And I would say that my approach from when I started at Execaire to now has changed dramatically. I've, I guess, matured perhaps.
Yeah. You probably went into it saying like, let's just do this. Like, why can't we just make this change? Yeah.
What do you mean you don't understand how to turn your phone on or, you know, whatever? Right. You have various different levels of, you know, people's comfort with technology. And at the time, you know, when I was younger, I was like, well, what do you mean? I mean, this is just, it's just technology. It's just an iPhone. I mean, it's super easy to use.
Just figure it out.
Just figure it out. Here's the phone.
You
know, and, you know, the reality is that's certainly not how it works. Unfortunately, I guess you could say. But I mean, you know, we're going through a transition like that right now. I mean, we're implementing web manuals. I know web manuals was on your show there a couple episodes ago, and you know, I really believe in what web manuals is trying to do. You know, I understand what their core goal is, the value that they bring. You know, and so we're going through that kind of a transition right now. I think it starts. There's a couple of different segments to that. So you know, the first piece, which is I think one of the most crucial, is okay. What, you know, don't implement technology just for the purpose of implementing technology, right? So you need to understand what the value proposition is that technology is going to bring to your organization, right? So you know, we went through that with the web manuals platform. It's like, you know, when I first brought the technology to the team, it was like, okay, well, you know, this is just like a Dropbox. You know, or we already have this. We already have an application like this, right? I'm like, no, you're missing the point. This is not a distributive tool. That's not the point. If I wanted a distributive tool, there's hundreds out there that, you know, are super efficient. Where the web manual's value lies is in its document control piece and its capability of building workflows and approvals and you know, client feedback. You know, and that's something that we really want to improve on. And not just improve, but you know, drive more value out of it is the function in web manuals which allows users to provide feedback in the document. When that feedback is then tracked, and then it goes to the subject matter expert, and they can make the change in the document and publish it, and it's all done in one platform. So you know, we're taking. You know, there's no lack of of controlled documents in an air operation. I mean, you know, it's mind-boggling the amount of regulatory document or control documentation that we have. So. You know, there's huge value in the web manuals platform and controlling that process in one spot. So instead of a bunch of, you know, we used to, you know, when we did
documents flying back and forth in email, or
you know, you don't know what version you're on. People turn track changes on in Word documents, and it's just it's a mess. It's an absolute mess. So, you know, web manuals kind of embodies that entire process flow in one platform. And they are, quite frankly, based on the analysis that we did at the time, the only product that had that part of it. There's a lot of products out there that did the distribution on the aviation side, but none of them really kind of spent the time to build the actual, you know, flow. So I guess, you know, stage one in the implementation is always, you know, what value are we trying to drive out of this platform, right? If we're not going to drive value out of the platform, then, you know, the users are not dumb. You know, at the end of the day, they're going to look and they're going to like, what am I doing this? It's not making my life easier. It's not, you know, it's just something I have to learn and not change. So I think that's critical, is understanding the value and communicating that value, and making sure during the implementation that we never lose sight of that as the goal. Is implementing that value proposition. So that's number one, you know, and probably the most difficult part of it. You know, and then, you know, when we kind of move into it, you know, with the web manuals project, we kind of looked at it and we're like, okay, well, the end user really is you gotta, you know, and you know, when you were at Flight Docs, you know, apps, they go through tons of testing and regression testing, right? And bugs and all that kind of stuff. So you gotta, and at the beginning, this is something that I used to fail on quite spectacularly, was we would kind of throw a product into the user base that wasn't 100% configured, or, you know, we hadn't gone through all of the, you know, the necessary steps to vet it and make sure that it was set up properly. So then it would go to the users, and the users are like, well, this doesn't make any sense. Like, this is not working. It's terrible. You know, I like the old product. And then as soon as you set that perspective, it's very difficult to go back and say, hey, okay, by the way, okay, this is what it should have done. And that's a conversation you don't want to have. So, you know, with web manuals, we've really taken our time and we've said, let's make sure that we have a very small beta group. We test it for as long as necessary, no rush, and make sure that we get it all straight. And then once all that's done, then we can go to the user group. And then on the user group side, aviation technology, like if you use newer technology, but that's more widespread, like a QuickBooks or stuff like that, a lot of times now they've really spent a lot of effort on I don't know what the actual technological term for it is, but they have like in-app experiences where they like show you where to click.
Yeah, sure. Guided walkthroughs
Yeah,
and things
exactly,
like that.
right?
Yeah.
Aviation is light years from that, behind.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we don't have that. So you really have to put together a very strong training plan. So what we've started doing is kind of what you were doing at Flight Docs is we put together a lot of instructional videos. Because it takes so much time to build like CBT courses,
right,
on how to use a product and stuff like that, right? So, we're a small medium enterprise at that point. We don't have the, necessarily the resources all the time to really say, okay, we're going to implement web manuals. Let's create this really integrated CBT course that guides people through it and all that kind of stuff. So we started building videos for the pilots, short, because pilots, I can say this, pilots, we do not have a great attention span. So if the video is longer than 5 minutes, you've lost me already. So really little short videos of how to do things, and we've really also, even on AirInc Direct, for example, we use AirInc Direct. Very complicated, not complicated, but a very powerful tool.
Right, there's a lot to it.
There's a lot to it.
Yeah.
So no one's going to listen to me blab on for an hour about AirInc Direct. Right. So what we're trying to do is build these kind of bite-sized pieces that pilots can say, oh, well, here's a video on oceanic plotting charts.
Right.
It's 7 minutes or whatever it is. If you're going to go across the ocean, you haven't been there for the last 2 years because of the pandemic. Well, here, go take a look at this video and, brush up on it. So I think those really are the three steps. And, a lot of times we tend to rush technological implementation, and that really is the worst thing to do. Right.
Yeah, and just a quick mention for some of the software providers out there that there are platforms, there's technology that you can buy. I think a lot of companies always are thinking about, if I'm a software provider, I have to build everything in-house. It's particular to our product, but there are products out there. We used a product that we implemented probably about 2 years ago called WalkMe. Okay. And it was something that laid right on top of Flight Docs, right inside of the platform. And actually you could build, and we had our customer service and our training managers actually build these walkthroughs so that when you logged into the app, it popped open and said, hey, what do you want to, you could type in, I want to build a logbook entry. And it would actually step you through the process of going in, selecting your items, adding it to the logbook entry, putting in your compliance. Wow. So there are some cool products out there for people if they're interested in exploring. I think in general, there's a lot that now today, even in comparison to like when we rebuilt our system and going back to 2015, the back-end technology, the APIs that are available, there's a lot out there that's kind of like much more plug and play than even 3 to 5 years ago. Yeah. So the other question I had for you is around like as a project owner or a manager, I've found that that's a real key piece to implementing, is that if you don't have somebody that's responsible for kicking it off and actually seeing it to completion, that's another area for failure.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. But what I've found too is, I was a project manager for a long time at Execaire, and one of the things that everybody is too busy to improve. All the time, right? Yeah. And as a project manager, and the smaller your company gets, the more that problem accentuates itself, right? So in a small aircraft operator, or even a medium or large aircraft operator, in aviation in general, resources are a tight resource. it's a limited commodity, right? At that
point, you can't find many people that are like sitting around like waiting for something to do.
Exactly. So no one's twiddling their thumbs. So so from a project management standpoint, it's tough to simply bring on a project manager and say, okay, run this project for me. Right. It's kind of like, well, that's fine, but the project manager doesn't get any traction, right? It's like, okay, here are your goals, here's what you got to do, but then people are like, I don't have time to do it, and you're always the project manager is always just fighting to agree on the timeline, and then people always have excuses for why they can't deliver on the timeline.
Right.
So, where we've found what we've done over the last 10 years, especially, I'll speak specifically for my case, is that, I've project managed pretty much all of our technological implementations. And the key for me is that the project manager in aviation specifically needs to be someone who can get their hands dirty.
Sure.
And really not just be the person there sitting and saying, okay, guys, here's the plan. Now, go make it happen, and then sending follow-up emails. It's like, okay, as project manager, perhaps you need to understand the tool in detail. You need to understand the value proposition that it brings. You have to understand what the core functionality is. And then on top of that, it's like, okay, well, how about you get your hands dirty and, here's a couple of tasks on like creating the user base or setting up workflows or stuff like that. And, that's what I did at Execaire is I took the bull by the horns, I guess, and I was project managing it in a sense where I built the plan, but I also was the guy mostly doing almost all the tasks
and the testing and all that stuff. Yeah.
Or I would, sit with the person who was supposed to do it and say, okay, we got to do this now. I understand the product. You need to tell me your job or what you do, and
sure,
and we kind of designed it that way. So it was kind of like a direct project manager, like in the get your hands dirty, I guess is the best way to say it.
Sure, yeah, for sure. And I know as technology is advancing, and one of the other things that continues to I guess you could say advance, maybe evolve is the better term, but is around safety. Yeah. And so I'm sure that you have your hands as in being in flight ops, being a pilot. How do you see things changing over the last few years in regards to safety and SMS programs? And what have you been doing to keep up with all that?
That's a great question.
It's another one of those apps. It's another one of those.
It is.
Processes that just adds more and more to everybody's workload.
I mean, safety is core to what we do. Every time we make a decision in flight ops, we have management of change protocols in terms of identifying risks in what we're doing. We brought in FuelLinks into the organization, and FuelLinks is a fuel planning tool and tankering system, right? Well, when you look at it just on its face, it's like, oh, well, you're going to save money on fuel. Great.
Right.
But when you actually dig deeper on the safety side, it's like, okay, well, so we're going to start telling pilots, when to take fuel, when not to take fuel, and it's like, okay, well, there's a risk associated with that, right? It's like, well, does the FuelLinks program take into consideration runway performance? No, it doesn't. So it will give you, and maybe that is the future for FuelLinks, right? Is the ability to integrate with runway performance, so that you're not telling the pilot to take full fuel off of a wet runway, on a short runway, right? It doesn't exceed its max takeoff weight, but it exceeds its weight for the runway performance that you're on. So there's definitely risk components to the technological implementation there, but there's critical value on the business side. Fuel is by far the biggest expense of an air operator, other than the human resource aspect of it, but certainly fuel is the most expensive piece, and we have to plan it properly. So there's a business aspect to it, which is we need to make sure that we're tankering fuel when it's cheap. So we never ever fuel in Boston because fuel is crazy expensive there, right? So so there's a huge business value there. But then on the flight ops side, we really have to look at managing the risk associated with that. So every time we bring in any type of change, we do management of change analyses where we identify the risks and we develop mitigation plans based based on, how frequent, how likely it is to occur, and then what the consequence of it would be. And we have a whole, risk analysis process associated with that. So from that standpoint, on the technological side, we've really, since we've implemented so much technology over the last 10 years, we've really had to sit down and say, it's not just as simple as, implementing an app,
right?
Because these things can have real world consequences, if it's done too quickly or so on and so forth. So that's definitely one component of safety that we've kind of evolved over the last 10 years for sure. And then, certainly, what we find with safety is it's so influenced by all sorts of different things, right? So, one of the things that we've really concentrated on over the last, since the app came out, is really improving our communication flows between everybody in the organization, right? Breaking down these silos of information, connecting people, connecting stakeholders together in a much more collaborative kind of feel. And that's kind of version 3 of the app. That's what it's going to be. It's really kind of, the focus is to really build a platform where people can start collaborating more intimately on trips. Because, a lot of, it's not all the time, but there's certainly safety SMSs based on communication issues.
Sure.
Right? I didn't know this. I didn't know that. You should have told me this. You should have told me that. And, that's operations.
Right.
Communication is the is always been the key, right?
Yep.
The holy grail of, I guess, air operations has been, effective and efficient communication between different stakeholders, ground support, pilots, mechanics, the client.
Right.
So we found that, especially with the app, and that's one of the big things that the app was designed and intended for in version 2, was to bring in this concept of risk analysis into the app. So, Execaire, we have a list of items which require the pilots to do a risk analysis.
Sure.
And then they have to get that risk analysis mitigation plan approved by a chief pilot or the director of flight operations. And, that process used to be in another product, right? But by bringing it now into the app, and, version 3 is going to strengthen this piece of it, is we're not just going to have the pilots thinking about risk analysis. We're going to have the customer service team thinking about risk analysis. So if the client comes to you and says, hey, you know what, I want to go into this airport in the Swiss Alps.
Right.
Oh, right? It's not just let's get to the pilot will do the risk analysis. It's like, okay, bring the concierges now have that culture of saying, hey, there's some runway performance issues here. There's some issues that we have to address. Let's address them right now. Let's speak with the pilots. Let's get the team together. Let's have that conversation.
Right. And so from a business aspect, that is really helpful as well, right? And exposing some of these things, because by the time that, that request comes to customer service and then it ultimately, gets communicated then to the pilots, you're talking about potentially, long time, elapsing between that. And so being able to communicate with customers right then and there and saying, hey, we might have some issues with this, or maybe let's think about, another option, let's say, is really helpful.
Yeah. And, that's 5 years ago when I kind of moved into this new position. A lot of air operators in the past, the kind of how to book your flight was very much a call center type feel, right? So, client calls the call center and says, hey, I'm blah, blah, blah for tail, blah, 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 book me this trip, right? And then the call center would go, boom, 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 yeah, no problem, blah, 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 here's your client itinerary, right? And then that client itinerary would kind of flow through the company until it got to someone who had the wherewithal to say, no, we can't do that.
Right.
So 5 years ago when I came in, we implemented a new concept we called it the Flight Concierge concept. And what we did is essentially we went out to market and we said we need to hire really good people. We need to pay them very well. We need to make this a career position. This is not something we want turnover in. We want these people to have a lot of air operation experience. We want them to stick around. We want them to build a relationship with the client, build a relationship with the pilots. So we really implemented that. And that kind of goes to the safety aspect as well, right? It's like, okay, now we went from having these very junior entry-level positions, speaking with our clients about their trip, and not necessarily having 10, 15 years of operational experience behind them. So there's obviously, to your point, there's a business impact there by not being able to kind of, support our clients appropriately. But also on the flip side, there's a safety issue there as well, because these people, the entry-level positions, they don't necessarily have that experience to be able to identify safety risks until they get to the pilots. Right. So, that's definitely something that we did, as well as we brought all of that kind of risk identification and mitigation process a lot earlier in our kind of flow, our trip flow.
Yeah.
And the app was definitely key there, because now as soon as the pilot is assigned to the trip, there's a whole kind of thing they have to do. They have to go in, they have to acknowledge that they've been assigned as the pilot in command and as the SIC of this trip. And then from there, they can go in and then they look at the trip, and then they can declare risk analyses right in the app. So it's kind of all integrated now, which has, helped us, I think, significantly.
Yeah. Very cool. I know in talking, you mentioned fueler links. I know the other thing that we wanted to touch on was a bit about sustainability, and maybe you could talk about, your approach to that and Execaire and what you guys are doing in regards to sustainability.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I mean, again, one of your guests on your show, I mean, he had mentioned that, corporate aviation always has an optic issue when it comes to, especially it's been accentuated now with the carbon emission issue and climate change and so on and so forth. And, and rightfully or wrongly.
Yeah, sure.
Okay? I think there's certainly aspects to it that are correct, and I think there are certainly narratives to that are ill-informed. But nonetheless,
politically motivated,
perhaps, and so on and so forth. But there is definitely merit to the argument of being more cautious and in how we operate our aircraft from a sustainability standpoint. Execaire's put a lot of thought recently into this, because, of course, 2019 was 2018 was the launch year for CORSIA, which is it's an acronym.
That's a long one.
I know it off by heart, but I'm afraid I'm going to make a mistake. But everybody's going to understand what CORSIA is.
Yeah.
Which is the ICAO kind of international carbon monitoring and carbon offsetting program.
Right.
All major countries have signed on to this, including the United States and Canada and so on and so forth. So, every year we have to report on our carbon emissions for our fleet. And there's kind of three phases to that. So there's the first phase that ended last year, I think. And then we have the third phase, or the second phase that's going to finish in 2023. And then the final phase is carbon offsetting, where we've monitored carbon emissions for about a 5-year period. And now it's like, okay, well, now we have to start offsetting that carbon. So that's kind of where we're coming up to. CORSIA has its advantages, it has its disadvantages, and it's a good thing, though. In the end of the day, it's a good thing for operators to identify what our carbon emissions are, and really, generally speaking, for example, on the airline side, the airlines have been doing carbon emission monitoring for a long time. And, even before CORSIA came out, and, it's no secret that carbon emissions have a huge business impact as well, because if you increase your emissions, it's because either you're growing, which is great,
right,
or you're buying a whole bunch of gas.
Right.
So, airlines in general are like, well, we need to buy the least amount of fuel possible to do the mission we want to do. So just by that nature of that business relationship, they've always been trying to push, to buy less fuel, make aircraft more fuel efficient. And they've pushed the OEMs to really step up their game in terms of, hey, you need to make your aircraft more fuel efficient, because fuel, again, is the number one cost to an airline. So that in itself, so we were essentially trying to be sustainable anyways,
right.
It's just now we have CORSIA to say, hey, by the way, it's it's more than that. It's now not just a financial calculation. Now it's like, hey, by the way, you need to be, a good steward of the environment, and you need to do things to improve, to control carbon emissions. So for Execaire, that's what we've started doing. I mean, we're in the process of finalizing our carbon credit program. So clients will be able to purchase carbon credits from us, and that will offset the CORSIA. A lot of our clients had been offsetting carbon well before the CORSIA program anyways, because most corporations, they have carbon offsetting programs already for their operation, and aircraft are part of that. So they were just offsetting them anyways. We're doing that. We're also, again, we brought FuelLinks in. So the goal of FuelLinks is to, there's obviously a business value to it, which is, buying fuel effectively
in the right places.
Right?
Sure.
But there certainly also is an aspect to managing sustainable aviation fuels. Where can we get sustainable aviation fuels? How costly are they? How do we, we've talked to our clients about, do you want, SAFs are very expensive.
Right.
I mean, we're talking probably twice the cost of normal fuel. So there's a cost associated with that to our clients, and we've started looking at ways to bring sustainable aviation fuels into our home bases where our aircraft are based, and try and I think that for us is going to be the biggest effect, because it's tough when you're away from base to manage SAFs. Because number one, you have to ensure the specification and the certification of it, right? It's not just, the guy can go start selling SAFs on the corner of the street, right? There's a whole thing to it, right? So you actually have to verify that it's an actual SAF and that it's certified and that it's good to put in your airplane. You're putting fuel in a $40 million airplane. You don't want it to be, whatever.
Sure.
So with FuelLinks, that's kind of what we've been managing. But, we've also been really trying to put an effort on getting SAFs at our home bases. But the reality is, unfortunately, at this point, is that the global supply chain of fuel has not kept up with that, right? There's just there's not enough SAF. There's not enough distribution channels for SAF in the market. So it's very challenging to find SAF and to source it. And in Canada, we have a big problem with that. It's very difficult to find SAF. It's just not available. Logistically, it's not available in the market. So that's been tough, but we've been putting a lot of effort into trying to find ways to do that. And, on the flight ops side, we have started looking at ways to evaluate pilot decision-making and flight planning, So, we did an analysis about our Challenger fleet. We have a huge Challenger fleet in Montreal, in Canada. We have about, 12 Challenger 605, 604. So it's a pretty, pretty sizable fleet of aircraft that, so it's like, okay, well, what if we, Challengers usually fly along at Mach 80. Okay. Well, so what would happen if we slowed the airplanes down to Mach 7.7 or Mach 7.8? Right. Because, most people, it's the effect of speed on fuel consumption is huge. It's huge. Between 8.0 and 8.3 or 8.2, right? It's huge difference in fuel consumptions, but not a huge difference in time. So, we've started looking at ways to say, hey, Mr. Client, would you be willing to fly your aircraft now at Mach 7.7?
Right.
And over the year, that will equate to whatever amount of time it is. Maybe I can't remember what the exact details of the analysis were, but they would spend X amount more time in the airplane.
Sure.
But you would save X amount of pounds of fuel. And there's obviously a business aspect to that, but there's also the sustainability aspect to that. So, we've looked at doing that. And of course, we've been working with Nav Canada and various different ATC networks because, one of the worst things that you can do in an aircraft is have these kind of, New York style approaches where you're 200 miles from the airport and they have you down at like 3,000 feet.
Right.
Blowing along, right, and you're just like burning gas and stuff like that. So we've worked with the NBAA and with the CBAA and trying to find ways to say, hey guys, like can you plan your arrivals better so that it's a constant descent profile, so the aircraft the pilots are not jamming the throttles every 5 seconds to try and do speed restrictions or whatever. Make it more effective. And that's been, Canada has been really behind on constant descent profile approaches. It's really a problem. The U.S. is much better at it. I flew into Palm Beach the other day, and they said, okay, well, you're clear via the Captain 1 arrival into Palm Beach. Perfect. And we were way back at 40,000 feet at that point. And all we do is we say, okay, the bottom altitude is 4,000 feet on the approach. We set the airplane up. The airplane calculates a constant descent profile, and we flew a constant descent profile with a constant N1 value pretty much the whole way down. In isolation, that may not mean a huge amount.
Sure.
But if you multiply that by the amount of aircraft movements,
all the flights out,
you're talking huge changes. Continue with the ATC issue is that the North Atlantic airspace is becoming more flexible in terms of routing,
right?
Because of the implementation of space-based ADS-B. So now the Shanwick and Gander, they have space-based ADS-B, so they've been able to reduce the separation between aircraft, and we're started to see they've gotten rid of the NAT tracks. So below 33,000 feet, they've got rid of the NAT tracks, and during COVID, they had gotten rid of the NAT tracks completely. So which means essentially you can fly whatever route you want.
Sure.
And even though the NAT tracks were when they're built every day, they're kind of designed to take advantage of the current winds in effect and all that kind of stuff. There's random route flying is always better.
Sure.
So, on the ATC side, we're working with stakeholders to kind of really press them on, improving the design of arrivals and approaches and airspace management and all that kind of stuff, because that really makes a huge difference.
Sure.
We've also implemented technology recently, which is the version 3 of the app that's coming out in the summer, is the ability to more proactively identify delays. Flightaware launched recently their Flightaware Foresight program, which is essentially, and people think of Flightaware, it's funny, people think of Flightaware as like a nice software company that, does these nice little aviation maps and all kinds of stuff. But it really is a lot more than that. It is a data warehouse. Like it is a data company. And they've realized that clearly, which is great. Sure. So it's like, they have tons and tons and tons and tons of data. They can tell, and with Foresight, apparently we're still in the implementation phase of that. They're able to identify based on weather patterns and time of day and various different things, what kind of delays an airport will be experiencing. Right? Sure. And if you tie that in with the FAA program, which identifies delays based on weather and stuff like that, you can really build a pretty good, hey, going in there, you're going to have a 30-minute delay. Right. And so we find that super important from a sustainability issue because, everybody, I've done this before, and shame on me and shame on a whole bunch of pilots as we go, we take off out of Teterboro, and we know there's going to be delays going out of Teterboro. We know. But we jump in the airplane, we spool up 2 jet engines, and we sit there on the ramp, and we're just right, just burning gas. Yeah. So there's that aspect to it, but there's also the client aspect to it, which is critically important as well. Is that these people, our clients are CEOs, chairs of the board, people where time is extremely valuable to them. So they don't want to be sitting on the ramp in Teterboro for 30 minutes waiting either. Right. So, what we're trying to accomplish is the ability to say, hey, by the way, there's a forecasted 30-minute delay in Teterboro. So if you move your departure by 30 minutes or an hour or 2 hours, there will be no more delay. Right. So go for dinner, take your time, stay overnight, give the client the information to be able to make perhaps a more informed decision, so that they don't have to sit in a delay that they don't need to. Right. So if you group all of these things together in terms of sustainability, I think that's a pretty good way to, because everything that's outside of that becomes things that are not necessarily things that we can really impact. So OEM technology, the advent of hydrogen aircraft and stuff like that is the key. Right. That will have the biggest impact on sustainability, but it's not something that's in our control other than then voicing our opinions to the OEMs to say, hey,
we'd be interested in
these things are
right.
super important for us.
And going back to one of your first points around like talking with customers and discussing changes to flight profiles that could have an impact in regards to sustainability. I've talked to a bunch of people, and there's concerns that people have around, our customers just want to get from point A to point B as fast as possible. They don't want to hear about all this stuff. They don't care. I'm interested to learn, like, if you've had those conversations, what's been the approach, and have you seen success in that?
Yeah, I mean, it's an optional program, right? So
sure.
It really is. We do have clients, more U.S. based clients, say, that are agreed. I mean, they want to get in a private aircraft, and they want to get to A to B as soon as possible. And
only the Americans are interested in that.
Predominantly, yeah. But people are smart, and they understand that the environmental piece to the puzzle is going to be here forever,
right?
In the long run, and perhaps they don't use it in every case,
right?
Perhaps if they're going on vacation and it will cost them an extra 5 minutes to save 1,000 pounds of fuel, well, maybe they'll do it then. So it's not necessarily to force people into making the decision. It's to give them the data to be able to
educate them on options.
What is available to you to impact your, because that's really what it is. I think on a flight, from Montreal to California, it's about 1,000, 1,500 pounds for about 5 minutes, 5-6 minutes. So like if you put that into context, I memean, 1,000 pounds of jet fuel is a lot.
Yeah, huge.
It's a lot. So for 5 minutes, right? I mean, that's the time to, go get a coffee, so the reality is like, but, at some points there are times where clients say, no, I got to get there now. So, we go at 8:02. And that's the reality of the industry, and that's what our industry is based on. But we need to provide that data to the clients so that they can make the decision at that point. Right. It's that's to me the best approach.
Sure. Cool. Well, sounds like you got a lot of different things going on. We're early in 2022. I guess any particular things that you're focused on, or new things coming from Execaire that you want to touch on?
Well, we talked about the version 3 of the app, and a real push to embed collaborative technology in there and bring our teams together and our stakeholders together. That's key for us. We as a management company, we're continuing to transition from, a lot of management companies, they believe that they are flight operations companies. We are. But I tend to think of Execaire, me personally, I think of Execaire, we are a customer service company with a flight operations group.
Sure.
Right? And we are continuing to find ways to improve our clients' experience, curate that experience, build something that they want, that they like. And that's key for us going forward in this year. Sustainability we talked about. We're going to continue to push programs like that. But like I said, there's a lot of roadblocks in the industry about just not having access to certain things and not necessarily having power on certain aspects. And we're really pushing the growth of the charter sales market. I mean, it's been unbelievable the last couple of years. Last couple of years, let's put it this way. Excluding the pandemic,
right?
Okay, or early in the pandemic, the charter market for the people's request for charter aircraft has gone through the roof. It's not going to stop. It's people want to fly privately, and there's a huge value proposition to private flying. I mean, I flew on the airlines the other day. I fly on the airlines a lot, and I have never enjoyed that experience ever. Delays, canceled flights, getting reassigned, not being able to talk to anybody. At one point during the pandemic, Air Canada shut their entire phone system down, so you couldn't even call them. It is an absolutely horrible experience. And, so private aviation is kind of, people who have access to the capital to do it is really going to be here for a long time. It's going to grow. So, we're gearing up for that. We're gearing up for the logistical challenges that's going to entail. But like I said, we've had historical charter numbers in the last couple of years, and it's going to continue, I think.
Cool. Well, thank you for stopping by.
It's always a
I
pleasure.
appreciate you coming through and giving some great details about your experiences. I think I always appreciated working with you and connecting on all this great stuff. And I think that it's helpful for others to hear about your approach to all the different things that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. I'm glad it actually worked out face-to-face.
Yeah, for sure. We've been planning this for a couple months now.
The remote working has been good, but there's nothing that replaces face-to-face interaction. We've learned that through the pandemic, that working completely remotely is not successful in the long run. And so I'm super happy that I was able to come see you face to face, discuss these topics. I really love what you guys are doing here with the Growth Podcast, and I've been a big listener over the last couple of months. So I'm hope you guys continue along with that, and maybe in a couple of years I'll be back.
Yeah,
with,
for sure.
with new things. So anyways, thanks, Greg.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.